Hello everyone, welcome back to another video in the Android app from scratch series. If you remember last time we kind of went over how to create an options menu, which basically is like pretty much a menu at the bottom of your Android device when you hit the menu button here. Now, if you've noticed in this in the source code I have, I've actually deleted my video utility class, whatever that was called, and I've actually removed all the jars related to the Java Media Framework because I've actually found a way to do it with Android. You see the little comment up there just to remind me to make a video on this later, and we'll probably go over that in the next video on how to remember our end goal is to get certain frames of the video and convert that to a GIF format. And I found something that requires API 10 plus, so that's I know 8 is 2.2 Android, so we're only going to have to deal with certain types of phones, but it's still better than using some sort of external library. So anyway, let's get started. Today we are going to be going over, since we created that options menu with settings and exit. Today we're going to be going over how to create a sort of like settings or preference activity. So, it's actually built into and the Android SDK. You don't really have to create your own, and it's really easy to do. So we're just going to go ahead and create a new class. Let's name it preference activity. Preferences or just preference. Let's just make it preference. So preference activity. Let's finish that. And all you have to do here is you just have to extend preference activity, and actually that is going to be bad because those should not be named the same. So let's go ahead and rename that. Rename it to settings activity and change this to preference. Now we have to make sure to import everything. And as with any activities, we have to override on create. And what you usually see in a sort of activity is you have this set content view and you're on create, which I'll just show you here as I'm invited to go play Team Fortress. You set your content view to a resource, a layout resource like main, which we saw in I believe our first video we went over this stuff, but you can see main here. In preference activity, it's actually a little bit different. You don't really use a layout, you use like pretty much a preference XML, and it's actually different. You do add preferences from resource, and then you specify the resource ID. Right now we don't have one, so let's go ahead and create that. What I usually do, I'm not sure if it's the main practice, but I create a new folder called XML, and then right-click XML because we have to add our resource, and do new Android XML file. And I'm just going to create a blank one. That's probably the best one to do. I'm just going to do preferences.xml. It actually doesn't specify. Oh wait, there we go, preference. And we do want a preference screen as our root element. So go ahead and hit finish on that, and it'll create it for you. I'm just going to go right to the XML. And again, with any of these XML layouts, you can add it through the visual interface or just directly edit the XML. So now that we've kind of created that, we can finish up this code. Just r.xml.preferences. And that works fine. And now that we've done that, we can pretty much edit any of this stuff, and it'll show up as soon as we load the activity. After I import bundle, of course. Now, what's really awesome about this preference activity is that when you go into the preference activity and you edit a value in there and then you save, it'll automatically do all the saving for you. And it will also automatically do all the loading for you when you open up the preference activities, so you don't really have to manage any of that stuff. Now, if you are in your main activity or anywhere else in your program, you do have to manually load all the preferences based on the IDs that you specify in preferences.xml in order to actually access the data. But you don't have to do any of that stuff in a settings activity unless you create your own custom preference, which is one of these things. Or you somehow create a new preference, I guess, class that you want to also work with. I'm pretty sure you have to manually edit the information there. Anyway, let's go ahead and add some things into this preferences.xml. Now, I have a little list here of things that we might want to do for our program. I'm thinking like we might want frames per second, where we want to save the files, whether or not our application wants to check for updates, and maybe whether or not we want to automatically convert videos as soon as we select them or something like that. So the first thing, a good idea when you're creating this preference screen is you kind of want to divide the different types of preferences. Say you have an account. You want to divide account preferences and application preferences separately. So I'm just going to go ahead and create and you do that by using a preference category. So I'm going to go ahead and create a preference category and call it, let's see, video preferences. And in order to really display this, I'm going to be opening up the emulator soon. And let's create another preference screen or preference category and name this application preferences. And that should be good for now. And in order to actually start one of these preferences, I'm pretty sure you just start it like a regular activity. So start activity, new intent, context, then settings, activity, class. That ought to do it. So now when we run this, just gotta exit out of this old one. And you notice this is much faster with no freezings because I actually figured out that the jar files in the previous tutorial which were causing all the errors. So menu, settings. Oh, looks like I probably got that thing wrong a little bit. It's perfectly fine. Just go ahead and check this. Unable to find. Oh, okay. So this is a really common error when you create your new activity and you want to immediately show it. You actually forget to add it to the manifest, which is of course what I did. So let's go to Android manifest, and you basically have to add a new activity to your in between the application tags. So let's go ahead and do that. So activity Android name equals, and that's dot settings activity. When you do dot, it's basically adds it on to the package name, I guess you could say. And I'm pretty sure that's all we need. We could give it a label, but yeah, let's go ahead and do that. And I believe there's already a settings string that we can use. And we don't need to give it an intent filter because we don't really need to launch it from, say, the launcher or start it as its own separate activity, which is something that I might explain later. But anyway, after we've edited the manifest, this should run now. We shouldn't get that error anymore. I can't count the number of times I've accidentally forgotten to add an activity into the manifest and my program has crashed. So okay, so we hit the settings and this opens up our settings activity, and you can see these different dividers, which is the preference categories that we've added. Now that we've added these preference categories, these kind of separate any of the preferences you put in between them. So let's go ahead and add some of those. Now you have to put these preferences in between the the preference categories, opening and closing tags. Um, so let's see, the first one, frames per second. Now we probably want an edit text preference for that, since edit text preferences allows the user to input some sort of value into the preference. And at some point we're going to have to limit their edits to only integers, which I'm sure we'll do later. But for now, let's actually do it through here, since it's a little bit easier. So in this one, we want to add an edit text preference, and its key should be let's just name it pref FPS, and this key is what you're going to use to actually load the preferences when you need it later, so make sure it's something easily distinguishable and rememberable. And the title is let's just name it frames per second, and the summary is basically what this preference does. So and we're just going to say edit the frames per second for the GIF. And then you can set like things like default value, and I'm not sure what really a standard GIF frames per second is. Let's just go ahead and put 10. I honestly have no idea. I'll have to research that. But anyway, you can see that added this XML, and when we run it, it should show up. And I'll show you what a edit text preference looks like. I'm sure many of you have seen them in actual programs before. So you see that it is separated. It is in the video preferences because we put it in that preference category. And there is the title and the summary. And when we click it, a little dialog will show up with our value that we put default. And let's hit cancel because we don't actually need to edit that. And that's looking pretty good. Now we have to add a few more. Again, in our video preferences, we need to save location, which will also be an edit text preference. So let's copy this and just edit those values. Pref save location, and default value, honestly, I don't really know where. I know it's like a media folder, so I'll have to think about that, or I could probably just bring it up right now. Let's figure out where the default directory. I think actually it is based on which phone you have, so we're gonna have to get a little bit more in depth in that, because I think it differs based on carrier. So we might actually have to set this in our settings activity.java. So let's make sure to put a comment here. Change pref location. Alright. Now we've added our two text preferences, and let's add something in application preference. We want to add an edit or a checkbox. So let's do that. Checkbox preference. Now this one's slightly different, but pref check updates. Yeah, let's make that capitalized. Excellent. And default value, we want to be true because we do want this thing to check for updates. You can decide whether or not you want your application to check for updates based on personal preference. You can choose to have an application that doesn't want to check for updates, or basically whatever. So if we go to settings, we can see this is a checkbox, and this is a edit text, and I think there's a few different other ones. List preference allows you to choose basically a string value out of a predefined list of values. And preference screen is also something else I kind of want to show you, since it's really useful. We're just going to go ahead and create one that we're probably going to delete later. But let's go ahead and put preference screen around these two edit text preferences, and I'll show you what it does. It's really useful for kind of organizing your preferences. Let's just give it a title. Let's say basic video preferences. Now, preference screens, you can basically think of it as another layer to your preferences. Because when it just has this basically thing you can click on, and when you click on it, it'll open up the next layer, I guess you could say. And it's really useful, again, for kind of dividing your preferences into easier to navigate categories. But we don't really need that, so we're just going to get rid of that. And list preferences, again, shows you a predefined list. I guess we could add one of those just to show you guys what it does. And preference is the default one. It usually has some sort of on-click thing, and you kind of have to, you can like create a custom class that, or a subclass of preference that provides new functionality. Maybe you want some sort of date picker or something like that. And then ringtone preference, I'm guessing, has something to do with ringtones. I don't know. I've never used it before. Now, the one different thing about this list preference is that the default values has to be basically an array of values. And I've actually never used list preferences before, so I'm not entirely sure. I assume what you do is you create a string array. Let's just do that. And then onto this you add an item. Let's add another item. And then in our, let's save this, in our preferences, let's see, attributes from list preference entries. We want string, no, we want array, string array. So I'm wondering if this will work if we just run this like that. Probably will yell at us for not having enough information in our list preferences, but I just want to show you guys how this works. So menu settings. Okay, it's blank, but when we click this, oh, of course it crashes, but and entries array and entries value array. Oh, okay, I see. So you need both a array of values and an array of things that the user actually sees. So those can be two different things. Like if you want hot, cold, and medium, those could be integers of like 0, 1, and 2. But you don't want to display that to user. You want to display something useful to the user. Okay, so you can choose one of these two things. And it looks like a little radio button there. And that's pretty useful if you want to limit the user to only selecting a few things. And I'm pretty satisfied with our preferences activity right now with what we have in here. So I'm just going to show you one more thing, and then we're going to end this video. And that one more thing is how you load these preferences now that we've been able to set them, how we load them into, say, our main activity. And just like a regular activity, we can set sort of like on quick listeners to these preferences. Say if we want edit text preference. Say we want to find a preference on the screen. Now this is a little bit different because you don't actually get the find view. You don't actually use the find view by ID, I believe. You actually use find preference. After I import this, I believe I misspelled that. Did I, or is it just being silly? Anyway, you do find preference, and then you give it the key that we provided, or that we set here, say pref FPS. And you got to make sure to cast that, and then you can then manipulate things like you can do set on preference click listener, on preference change listener. On preference change is something that we're probably going to have to add in order to validate that we have an integer. We're going to do that in a future video since we're kind of running a little bit low on time here. But let's go ahead and just add this in here real quick. And there we go. Alright, so the last thing that I'm going to go over is say we want to load the preferences from this. So let's assume that, okay, we've gotten the file here, and say we have a method called convert, and that accepts the frames per second. Now, in order to get the frames per seconds from the preference, we have to actually import them, or not import them. We have to call, I believe it is, I'm trying to remember. It's forgetting what the name of the actual object we do to get the settings. Let me think about that for a second. Alright, so it is actually called shared preferences. And then preferences. Now, there's two different ways that you can actually load and save preferences. You can either, when you use something like this preference activity, basically you have one set of preferences for your program, and in order to get that information, you do shared preferences equals preference manager dot get default shared preferences, and you just pass it the application context, and that will get the preferences of this settings or preferences activity that we have. And you can also, I believe you can just get, there's another way to do it, is you can get preferences based on a name that you provide. You can just like get preferences or something, I'm not entirely sure what it's called. Preferences. There's some object or something that you specify a name to a method called like get preferences, and you can load and save it based on a certain preference file name that you provide. But for now, we don't really need to use that. I don't think we're ever going to need to use that in this program, since we have this preference activity and we can just get the default shared preferences. So now that we have that, we can then do preferences, and we need to get a string because the frames per second are shared as a string, and our key is pref FPS, and our default value I think was 10. That's what we specified. Now, of course, this is going to be as a string, so in order to pass it to convert, we have to convert that to an integer. And that's it. And you probably want some try catches around here to make sure that this doesn't actually fail, so that we'd be able to get the FPS and pass it to our convert method if we end up having one like that. And I think that's good enough for this video. I'm sure next video we're going to be editing a few things here and there. We might also get started on, hopefully get started on the video stuff now that I've found this information. Hopefully you don't have to restart that all over again like last time. But yeah, that's been this video for the Android app from Scratch series. Make sure to comment, rate, and subscribe. And this is Quackworth signing out.